Welcome back. Today we have a video that has been a long time coming. Something that I've been meaning to do for quite some time, and even kind of tried to do at one point. Wasn't quite happy with how it turned out. So we're going to try this again from the top, really kind of try to capture what I wanted this to purvey. This is going to be a how to play video for the Robotech collectible card game. As you know from my channel, I've been trying over the last year and a half here to collect all of the decks that exist for this game, get scans of them together, and get a proper logged home for all of the cards so that they at least exist in some capacity on the internet, so that someone could print, play, proxy, whatever they wanted to do to at least experience this game. I personally think it's a great game and doesn't get enough attention. It was hard to get a hold of, wasn't advertised very well, and only existed for a very short period of time. But even with that short period of time, there's enough cards to create multiple decks and to have quite a bit of variety in your playstyles and builds. So today I just want to show off a little bit of how to play this. This is going to be pretty basic overview. Eventually I'd like there to be an actual recording of gameplay so you could watch the full game be played out, but for now it's just going to be kind of a walkthrough of what kind of each card type does, what words mean, and how turns would play out. So for starters here, I've just kind of pulled 4 cards aside. These are going to be your 4 primary card types. The first one is going to be character cards. I've grabbed 2 different ones here, Max Sterling and his daughter Dana. What you'll notice with Max here is there's a cost in the corner, there's a faction type, character, or title of the card, of course. It's a character card, whatever kind of stats they do, and then their effect. Now you'll notice that this bonus, where it says +1 weapon, +1 armor, is also listed here. This number is the same as whatever the bonus has printed, so it's a little redundant, but it's easier to just sometimes see the numbers added to your stats as opposed to reading the whole text out. And then every card has some kind of action effect that can be used, played from your hand as an action, instead of used as whatever card it actually is. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But for now, M, of course, just means male. Now what you'll see with this one is it is a pilot Earth. Pilot cards are played and then are attached to the mecha cards in the game to serve as pilots for those units to give additional stat buffs. There are, however, pilots that are civilians, and they are left in play in the what's called the base zone. It's kind of the middle row of your playmat, and they have just some kind of active effect that affects the board state permanently while they are in play. Of course, they still have an action as well. Then, most importantly, we have our mecha cards. These exist in a variety of ways. Specifically, the Veritex, the titular units from the show, have some transformable modes. One of the iconic things about Robotech is the transforming units that the main cast uses. There's a fighter mode, which is kind of like the jet plane form that they've got, a guardian mode, or Gerwak mode, kind of the half and half, and then battloid mode, which is the full sort of robot form. They have L and S here. Some have L, some have S, some have both. This means land and space. They have to have at least one of these. They have to match the attacking or defending unit to be able to engage with them. They have their own stats, effects, sometimes keywords, and then other effects, then of course an action as well. And finally we have just straight up action cards. Now action cards have literally just a cost and an effect. You'll notice the action cards are always in this red text box, just like all of the actions are in red boxes, just to keep things consistent and easy to tell. There aren't too many of these action cards, or at least expressly action cards, since there are straight up actions on every card in the game. But there are a few of these, and they are often pretty good. But that said, we'll go ahead and just kind of go into the game. Now, I guess one last thing I want to cover, there are 2 additional card types. There are vessels and there are locations. They function like mecha cards where they have stats, but vessels and locations are played in your middle row in the same place you would play civilian pilots, and they can't attack other mecha cards, but they can attack other vessels. Vessels can attack locations, locations can't attack at all. but they pretty much have like a flat buff effect of some kind too. A lot of like locations are like do something, draw a card, or do something, give something +1/+1, things like that. So the locations just sort of sit there and act as some sort of permanent effect and have a life total that can be, so they can be destroyed. To start the game, you do shuffle a deck. In this game, decks are 50 cards. You have up to 3 copies of any card in the deck, unless, of course, the card says basic on it. There are some units that have basic. These here, you can have any number of copies of these cards in the deck. Now, you wouldn't typically want to do that in a lot of cases because the basic units are typically, believe it or not, pretty basic. But it is an option for building. And there are some decks, especially with like the Zentradi decks and the battle pods and things, where you would want to have multiples, but it's just kind of just an option there. So what you'll do to start the game, you will shuffle your deck and you'll draw 4 cards. Now, both players will do this. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you'll set your deck aside. Once that's done, you'll kind of reveal your hand, see what all you got. We got a absolutely abysmal hand after that shuffle, but that's okay. This will give us an idea of how to get going. So one of the things that's unique about the Robotech trading card game is that you play the game in simultaneous turns. There is an active player and a defending player. The only difference that means is one person is attacking for the turn and the other is defending, but all of the turns play out simultaneously and the actions are all done together. They're just kind of done one after the other. So getting into starting out the game, the first phase is just called the regroup phase. There's 2 steps to this, a recall step and a refuel step. The recall step is you'll essentially bring any units you have currently in battle back into your base, and that's the end of that. And then the refuel step is you'll draw 3 cards. Now that's a unique thing about this game, is that every turn you're going to draw 3 cards, both your turn and your opponent's turn. That sounds like a lot, but when we get into how costs are played and resolved in this game, you'll see very quickly that it makes a lot of sense that you would need a number of cards to be able to keep up playing every turn. After that, we go into what is called the Proto Phase. Now, this is kind of like playing a land in Magic. Any card in your hand can be a land, a proto culture card. Any card. So they're played face up. We're going to play Mutiny here as our proto culture card. Now, while this is here, it serves as 1 mana, 1 energy, 1 fuel, whatever you want to call it. And that's used to pay for the cost on cards. Now, any card that is in your proto culture area can still be used as its action effect. If you do so, you just flip it face down. So that it's still usable as an energy, but it no longer has its effect. So it's a really cool thing that you playing your card down into energy doesn't lose its effectiveness. It still has some kind of purpose, which is an awesome thing about this game, I think. So the way that it works is once per turn, you can play your proto card. Now, in this proto card playing phase, you get a couple of options. You can play any card into your proto zone, or you can play a pilot, a location, or a vessel. Now, pilots, locations, and vessels all count as a protoculture card, even though they are not specifically in the proto zone. So if you've got a pilot and a vessel here, you have 3 energy. If you had 2 cards here, you'd have 4. If one of your pilots dies, you go back down to 3. So that becomes kind of the gamble of deciding what's safe to play and what isn't. Because playing your pilots and your vessels and things like that is really powerful and they have good effects, but if you lose them, then you also lose energy. So it's like having lands in Magic that have an effect, but if they die, you're out of lands. That's a bad problem. So you have to kind of balance out when to play a pilot versus when to play an action card versus when to play just something into your energy etc., and I think that's really cool. But once you've got your energy here, I have nothing to do with my kind of initial turn 1 thing, so we're just going to fast forward it to turn 2. Say I've played a second card. On 4, I'll have my 3 energy, or 3 cards in hand from before. Okay. So after you've done your, so we are the active player this turn. Once you've done this, it goes to your opponent's turn, their opponent's refuel phase, Proto Phase. They do the same thing that you just did, play their energy. Then after that, you go into what's called the mechanized phase. This is where you play units, play all of your, it's kind of your main phase, if you will. So here we have 2 energy. Cost don't really mean anything here, it's just 2 energy. So we're going to go ahead and start by playing VF1A Refuel. Now this card says, advance, pay a battle point, draw a card, can only be used during the mobilized phase. Not really important to us right now, but I'll get into that in a minute. So we have our 2 energy. Now technically this mechanized phase is broken up into a first step called the Proto Count phase, where you count your total spendable energy for the turn. And just keep track of that in some way. My friends and I find it's easiest to kind of tap cards once they're spent, but there's nothing in the rules specifically about tapping them. You're just supposed to kind of keep track of how many you have. Now another thing, action cards, or any card you're playing as an action, they have costs, of course, but you don't have to pay the cost to play an action or to play a card as an action. You just have to have this many available total energy. So even if so for example, this costs 2. Now I've paid 2 energy for this guy this turn from these 2, so I technically don't have anything left to spend. But because I have 2 energy, I could play this action card to do this effect. I could also then play this 1 cost 1. And this 1 costs 1, and this 1 costs 1, and this 1 costs 1. Even though it's more than 2, I still have at least 2 represented, which is what you need to have for paying the cost of actions. That's also the case for playing pilots, vessels, or locations. They all do the same thing. You can play a 6 cost vessel during your Proto Phase as long as you have 6 total energy available. You don't have to spend it, you just have to have it. So you do that, your opponent does the same thing. You play out as many units as you have spendable energy. And then it goes into what's called the battle phase. Simple as that. The battle phase works by you choose which units you want to attack with. You send those units up to the front row. This is the battle area. And any units up here are attacking. Now you as the attacking player are to decide what units are attacking and in which way. So you have 2 ways to attack. You can do a direct attack, where you attack your opponent for battle points. Now the win condition for the game is to score 25 battle points. It's like doing 25 damage to your opponent. You can choose to attack them directly, or you can choose to attack individual units. Now you can only attack units that are already up here, and we'll get to that in just a second. But if I wanted to attack a unit, they'd have to already be in the battle area. For now, because it's the first turn of the game or whatever, and I'm sending out my first attacker, there won't be anything up here already to attack. So I'm just going to say I'm attacking my opponent for whatever my stats are. In this case, I have 1, 2, 2 for stats. So I'm going to attack for 1 damage. My opponent would decide whether or not they were going to send something up to defend. If they didn't, they would just take the 1 battle point, or I would gain the 1 point, and we would move on. If they did send something up to defend, say this card, it has stats of 3, 2, 3. 3, 3, 2. So your cards have an attack power, a defense power, or an armor value, and then a speed. To be able to defend, they have to have at least the same speed or greater than the card that they're trying to defend. In this case, they're both 2s, so this card could defend this one. The idea is that some things are just too fast for you to catch up with, so you move this card up to defend, because they're both fast enough to fight each other. The way that then that works is we compare our total point values. I have the option first as an attacker to play a action card to try to buff my attack points up. My opponent can play one, I can play one, my opponent can play one, until we've decided we're done, and then we calculate our total value. Attacker puts their attack points into versus the defense points, and the defender does their attack points versus your defense points. The unique thing about this game is attackers can die on offense when they're being defended against. The defender can defeat them. In this case, my 1-2 is not going to beat any stat on this 3-3. The 3-3 will just destroy this card, and it's gone. My opponent's unit stays up here in their battle area. So for the sake of conversation here, we'll say that I was the winner with that. They lose a guy, and it's gone. The way that it works is you gain points, you gain battle points towards your victory when you defeat their unit. You gain points equal to the cost of the card that was destroyed. So if you kill a big 3 cost guy, you get 3 points. If you kill a 5 cost guy, you get 5 points, etc., etc., etc. So there's a balance in keeping little guys on the board and they keep value in that way, versus big cards that are harder to kill but are worth more when they're dead. But this guy goes away, my opponent loses it, or I lose it in this case. But for sake of conversation, that one loses, and my card is up here in the battle area. It goes to my opponent's turn. So now we are playing defense. So we draw our 3 cards for the turn, like you would. This happens every single turn. And then the regroup phase happens, where all the units in battle are pulled back to base. But this only happens for the active player. So now, as the defender, I don't have any defensive units because all my units are out in space already fighting. So if my opponent wants to attack me, I don't have anything to block with right now. Now, when they come to their battle step, because I have a guy up here, they could attack it because I have a unit in the battle area, which we didn't have happen in the last instance of this. But the nice thing is you get a mobilized phase on defense as well. So the opponent goes first because it's their turn. They play any units they want to play for the turn, or they play their energy for the turn. We play our energy. We go to 3. Then it's they play whatever units they want to play, and then we're going to go ahead and play a unit as well because we get a mobilized phase too. Then after the mobilized phase, we go into battle, and now you'll see that I have a defensive unit now. So a nice thing about this game is that even on defense, you get to rebuild your forces, and you have to keep track of that. When you overextend guys to attack, you have to know that on defense, a unique thing about it is because both players have the ability to play things on both turns, there isn't a moment where you're like, all right, I cleared my opponent's board, now I'm safe for a turn, because they're going to play cards again during your turn. And that's where a really cool dynamic in this game happens. I think the battle phase is one of the most interesting parts of this game, is balancing out when to play things on offense, when to play them on defense, when to send them out, when to keep them back for defense, etc. Now, one thing we didn't get into with the battle phase, just because I wanted to show initial, just all you would have to do for a battle step. With transformable cards, once you send them up to battle, you choose the position they're going to go into battle. They come back in that same position, and they can't transform again until they are sent out to battle again. So, say for this fight, I wanted this guy to go up as a Battloid. So I would send him up, and he is now in robot mode. He comes back in the same mode, and then during the next time I send him up to attack, then I could send him out as a Guardian mode, or I can switch him to Fighter mode, whatever. There is no sort of rotation that you have to go through. You can pick any form, but you can only do that during that phase, unless, of course, a card lets you do that. There are a couple of action cards that let you transform in times you normally couldn't. That is the gist of the entire game, to be honest. The Battle Step has one other thing you can do. You can choose to send units of the same faction up together to battle as what's called a group attack, and you add their total values together. This is kind of like banding in Magic, where you take your units and their stats become one stat, and your opponent can also defend with a defensive group as well. So they add up their attack value and defense value. Now, when you do that and you fight in a group and the points are compared, if the attacker wins, the attacker chooses how much total, so they have total attack value versus their total defense, and you choose how to apply that damage. So I have 3 total attack here, they have 6 defense. So I choose where to put the 3 damage, and I have to assign it all, like, I have to do 1 full card at a time. So I could do 3 to kill this guy, or I could do 3 to kill this guy and leave this one alive. But if they were like a 1 and a 2, I could do 2 damage to kill one guy and 1 damage to kill the other, and wipe them both off the board. And now that same rule applies for defensive groups versus offensive groups, where offensive or defensive attack values versus offensive defense values would be compared, and you would do the same math. Now, you can't send a defensive group up to fight 1 unit. It has to be, if it's 1 unit, you can only send 1 unit. If it's multiple units, you can send a group of whatever number of units up. If I had 2, you could send up 4, but if it's just 1, you can't send a group to defend them. The last thing is there is something called Intercept. Now, there are, as we were talking about how when it comes time to send a guy up to attack, I can choose to attack you as the defending player, or I can choose to attack a unit that's already in the battle area. If I attack a unit that's in the battle area, if you have a unit with enough speed to keep up with me, you can choose to defend with the unit to intercept that attack. So essentially changing the target to whatever you're going to defend with. So if I attack a unit, you're not locked into having that unit be destroyed. You can still choose to defend that unit, assuming you have something with enough speed. The same way you would declare a defender to defend yourself, you can declare a defender to defend your units. And sometimes that balance of keeping something alive versus losing it is really important, especially if you have a unit out that has a pilot attached, let's say, and the unit would die and you lose your pilot, meaning you lose an energy count for your proto count phase, setting you back a turn. Sometimes it's worth sacrificing more points, more value worth of cards to keep that alive. Sometimes it's worth it to do group defense. Sometimes it's worth it to do an intercept and lose a different guy to keep that bigger, beefed up unit alive. It just kind of depends on what's right for you. Now, action effects on cards are the only real other thing I want to discuss. You can use these at kind of any time that they are relevant. Specifically, the listed timings are at the beginning or end of any phase or step, but there are some cards that counter when a card is played. Like when something happens, you can play it in a response. So there are cards that do respond to specific timings, but those timings are mentioned on the cards that do it. In this deck, there is, for example, one of the cards we had in our hand, Fakir's Feint, as an additional cost, discard a Blue Squadron card, counter target action effect. So when your opponent plays an action, you can just respond with counter spell. But normally, actions are played at the beginning or end of any given phase. Now, there is no hand limits or anything like that, so you can draw to your heart's content. You'll find that eventually your energy reserves will start building, and you'll be able to start playing much wider numbers of cards a turn. Some decks, like the Zentradi, use a ton of one-cost guys and just get really wide with it, whereas the Earth decks use the bigger, larger Veritex to do kind of larger single attacks instead of multiple small ones. And that's where the different branches of strategy come into play. There are a couple of keywords and things that matter in the game. Solo is a word that you'll see sometimes. Cards with solo can only have one copy of them in play. That's like unique. Every pilot and every unit is already unique, or is already solo, unless something says otherwise. But certain cards will allow you to play multiple copies of stuff. There's also a word called burst, which works a lot like trample in Magic. If your attack is higher than the defense, the difference is done in battle points. That's pretty much the gist of the game. The actual gameplay is pretty simple. It's 4 basic phases and then a couple of little steps in between. The uniqueness to this game comes in the fact that all the phases of each turn are played together, and that you get to play things on defense. You get to technically attack on defense as well, and balancing out the fact that battles happen in real time. And it's a really cool like thematic thing. Like, you're not, in war, you're not ever just blocking. If you're in a dogfight, you're shooting back, you're rolling, you're dodging, you're shooting. It's a dance. And this game captures that really well, I think. Once you start building up the pilots and the civilians and the vessels and things, and start getting kind of active effects going and building up a multitude of things that happen per action, that's when things start to get really complex and a lot more fun. But generally, the basic rules are pretty simple. Again, I want to show off a little more like actual gameplay for this to make it make a little more sense in the future. But for now, that is the gist of it. It's play an energy of some kind, or a pilot, vessel, or location. Then play a unit equal to or less than the cost you have. You can play as many units as you want, as long as you can afford to pay for them. You go into battle, choose whether or not to send guys up or leave them back for defense. Try to accumulate 25 battle points. Rinse, repeat. Rinse, repeat. It goes back and forth until someone gets there. Or a couple of decks have like a you win the game card if something crazy happened. But that's its own thing. Otherwise, though, that's really all there is to it. Thanks for watching. I've been meaning to do this for a while, and I really wanted to... I've got all the decks scanned and up, and cards are printable and ready to be played, but there's nowhere to watch how it's done. So I just wanted to get something like that put together so we could at least show it a little bit and kind of get the basics out of the way. The rulebook itself is just like a folded piece of paper and is listed as a file in the Facebook group for the Robotech CCG players group. So you can find that there yourself, but it is a fairly simple read. And the newest version of the rulebook here, 0.995, covers all the vessels and locations and everything, and is a little bit clearer than the initial one that came with the starter deck. But that's the one that's posted. So, tell me what you think. Use this video, print a deck, try to get some games, and let me know if it seems cool. Worst case scenario, it at least is documented somewhere, and that was the goal. Thanks for hanging out. See you next time.